This week on the Wealthy Pilots podcast, the financial red zone. What is it? Let's talk about it with Scott Osborn right here. Stay tuned.
We've got some turbulence up ahead. Reach out to the Pilots Planner.
Hey everybody, welcome into the Wealthy Pilots podcast with the Pilots Planner, Scott Osborn. Joining me once again, he's Scott, I'm Mark, and we're going to talk about the financial red zone this week on the show. What's going on, brother? How you doing?
Living the dream, man. How about you?
Exactly. If I was any better, it'd be twins. So. And I don't think my wife would like that very much.
Nice.
Let's dive in this week and get it going, man. What is the red zone? People have heard this term. I think it was Prudential maybe back in the 90s that coined this, if I'm not mistaken, but the financial red zone. What is it?
Yeah, I'm not sure who coined it and when in the 90s. I was in elementary school, in high school. So I'm trying to make you feel bad here, Mark. But no, it's the financial red zone is really like that last 10 years before you retire and then the first 5 after you retire. So, it's like that window of like, hey, we got to make sure we got a good plan and we get things right and we don't make any mistakes that we can't recover from and make us have to work longer or work in retirement or not have the retirement that we want or those kind of things.
Yeah. And you say the 5 years after, that doesn't mean that you don't have a plan for the 20 years you're retired or maybe 30. It just means that that's that window where we want to be a little bit more diligent, right? Kind of keeping an eye on things. We're still going to have a strategy all through.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the plan is going to go to end of life or end of retirement, I should say, all the way through transferring assets to your beneficiaries. But that first 5 years is vital. There are folks that can make some mistakes in their first few years of retirement that have a significant impact to the remaining 25 to 30 years of their retirement. So that's why we call it the red zone. It's vital we get it right.
Yeah, the sequence of returns risk, that's the big term people might have heard before. That can be really dangerous. People retiring with the same exact numbers in 2 different kinds of economies or 2 different kinds of market volatilities can have a huge impact depending on sequence of return risk. So, all right, so why do we need to pay attention, Scott? I mean, clearly you kind of just outlined a little bit of it, but not only the sequence of return risk that I just mentioned, but just in general, why is the red zone, why is this 15-year window, such a hot topic?
Yeah, I think it's funny when even like when we think of like the name of this podcast, the Wealthy Pilots podcast, there's some people that don't like to talk about the fact that they're wealthy. And I'm not saying every single pilot is, but if you've been a commercial airline pilot for a good amount of time, you definitely should be wealthy, just different variations of it. And so it's important to pay attention in this last period because that last decade of the career, you should be able to double your net worth in that last decade. And
that sounds good.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, but there's a couple things that can happen, right? Like unique to a pilot, man, you have one unfavorable EKG in your late 50s and your career's over, right? I mean, any medical issue that they might get in their annual exam.
Wow.
And you talk to any of these guys and they know somebody whose career got cut short, even though they seem, healthy as an ox. Something happens and their career gets cut short by 5 or 10 years or 7 years. And that ability to double that net worth in the last, most highest earning, typically lowest expense time frame of their life, like the kids are gone and all that, college is paid for, and their greatest wealth producing tool has been taken from them. And so, that's like one example of how things can go wrong in that red zone that have a significant impact to somebody's long-term retirement plan. And so really what we're getting at there is like time is no longer on your side. When you're young and you got $40,000 in your 401k, you can lose half of it and like your retired self would never even know. If you got $2 million in your 401k and it goes to $1 million and then you have a heart issue 2 years later, you're screwed. I'm not saying you're not going to be able to, feed yourself, but
it's not
compared to what your goals were, you're way off track.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's more so just about being intentional and careful and doing some different scenario planning, right? I'm not a pilot. I go back to my ground pound and infantry days. We would do course of action analysis, right? And the pilots do their flight plan. What are some things that can go wrong? And think about those things. And then what are the ways that we mitigate those risks? And so that's all it comes down to. And there's too many guys that are, I would say, 50 or older who have a good chunk in their nest egg and they got a good vision for what they want to do, but they're probably not taking the right amount of risk and thinking through some of those scenarios and some of those courses of action that could go wrong, and having a plan for it.
Okay. All right. So what are some mistakes that you see, common mistakes in the red zone, besides referring to the fact that your co-host, that your co-pilot is much older than you? What are some mistakes that you that you might make?
No, so that was my mistake. My apologies, Mark. But
I'm teasing.
Yeah, I would say like the first one is like not having a plan. And so the great philosopher Mike Tyson always said this, right? When everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. My old infantry platoon leader, Captain Newman, James Newman, would say, everybody has a plan until they get shot at. And
fair.
But it's so true, right? I mean, when you're overseas, like, hey, here's how things are going to go. And as soon as bullets start flying, they're not going that way. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a plan, right? Even Eisenhower said, plans are nothing, but planning is everything. And that's why I'm the pilot's planner, right? Like, hey, the discipline of planning is going to get you better results. The plan that we develop is already wrong by the time you exit the meeting. It's already outdated and, is no longer accurate because the world's constantly changing. But that discipline of planning postures us to be able to respond to external influences very, very effectively. And so that's the first mistake, not having a plan. And what does that plan mean? How am I going to pay myself in retirement? When's ideally I would be done? What's the no later than date? And then some contingency planning. If I die early, if I'm disabled, if I have a medical issue that gets me, resign from my position as a pilot early, just thinking through a couple of those things and like, what happens? What does that look like? So not having a plan. And then the second part of that is not having the right amount of risk in their plan. We see typically one of two things. I'm late stage career and I'm 100% aggressive because I haven't made any changes. And you probably shouldn't be 100% aggressive that late in your career. Or I'm late stage career and I'm 100% conservative because I don't want to lose anything. Well, your 80-year-old self thinks your 50-year-old self is a pretty young man right now. So you got to invest for the long term too. And so kind of bringing these folks somewhere in that sweet spot in between is going to get them better results. But then also we're managing that risk where if and ultimately when something goes wrong, I have a heart issue, there's a market downturn, there's an economic downturn, and guess what? Typically your 401k and your early retirement are going to happen at the same time. When these things do go wrong, it's built into the plan and it's not hurting me in the short term and it's not going to hurt me long term because we were intentional and purposeful around the scenario planning.
Makes sense. All right, folks. So there you go. A couple of good things to think about. If you are nearing the financial red zone or already into it, make sure you're having a conversation with a financial professional like Scott. Reach out to him at thepilotsplanner.com. That's thepilotsplanner.com. We got a lot of good tools, tips, and resources there for you to check out. And you can find all the information that you need in the description of the show notes this week. Don't forget to hit the subscribe on Apple or Spotify or YouTube, whatever platform you're using. Ring the bell, get the notifications and all that good jazz so you can catch new episodes. And we'll be back with more here on the Wealthy Pilots Podcast with the Pilot's Planner, Scott Osborn. Scott, my friend, I'll see you next time.
All right. See you out there.
Information is for illustrative purposes only and does not constitute tax, investment, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified investment, legal, or tax professional before taking any action.